My name is John Rose. I'm an urban geographer at Kwantlen Polytechnic University, but I'm speaking here as an individual who shares Councillor Hardwick's concerns about the housing targets in the Housing Vancouver strategy. I support the Councillor's motion that calls for these targets to be reevaluated and for the provision of comprehensive, publicly accessible data on the housing landscape in the City of Vancouver. Let us be clear at the outset about the substance and intent of Councillor Hardwick's motion. It is not a motion to cap development and restrict population growth. It is not anti-supply, nor is it NIMBYism. Rather, the motion calls for a thorough assessment of current and future housing needs and the city's capacity to accommodate those needs. It is a call for robust evidence in support of decision-making that is transparent and accountable to council and the public at large. An approach that informs dialogue and negotiations with various stakeholders, and I would add, addresses housing narratives that too often take the form of caricature. The Housing Vancouver strategy has set a supply target of 72,000 new homes for the 10-year period between 2017 and 2028. Based on her analysis of census data, Councillor Hardwick has provided staff and council with a projection, approximately 30,000 units, of demand for dwellings over this time frame. To date, the councillor's figures have not been contested by staff and are in line with the city's own estimates of housing demand as outlined in the Metro Vancouver Regional Growth Strategy, the comprehensive plan for metropolitan Vancouver's development out to 2040. In fact, examination of the Regional Growth Strategy shows that the 72,000 unit target in the Housing Vancouver strategy is almost 20,000 units higher than the demand estimate of 53,000 units for the two-decade span of 2021 to 2041. It also shows an estimated 32,000 unit demand for housing, which includes rental demand at various income levels, for the period of 2016 to 2026 that closely matches the 10-year span of the Housing Vancouver strategy. In light of this, it is not illegitimate or unusual for Councillor Hardwick, or members of the public for that matter, to ask questions about the 72,000 unit target and the assumptions and data that lie behind it. To this point, the response to such questions has been that the additional units in the 72,000 unit target in the Housing Vancouver strategy are to satisfy unmet demand, those that the market has not provided with affordable housing, despite record levels of construction and despite growth in net construction in the City of Vancouver that has exceeded rates of growth in the number of households. The Housing Vancouver strategy also alludes to the continued presence of speculative investors in Vancouver's real estate market. Indeed, it asserts that some speculative investment might even be beneficial, so perhaps the targets have been set to include this source of demand as well. The problem, however, is that these demand components doing most of the work in justifying the 72,000 unit target in the Housing Vancouver strategy are in essence black boxes. To date, little rationale or data has been provided to support them. This needs to be addressed, particularly if the housing plan is, or future housing plans are, to inform policy and to garner public buy-in. Also requiring clarification is the nature of the targets themselves. Do they represent approvals, starts, completions net of demolitions? These all mean rather different things, and the fact that the nature of the targets is not spelled out in the Housing Vancouver strategy renders them even more opaque and problematic. In fact, the omission of this vital information is staggering. In sum, I concur with Councillor Hardwick that the targets in the Housing Vancouver strategy need a rethink should the city wish to use this mechanism in evaluating its role in enabling the provision of affordable housing. In fact, I would go further and question the city's approach of setting targets, for which it is accountable, on the delivery of housing that is ultimately in the hands of the private sector, and in a context where projecting demand and setting numbers in a post-COVID-19 future is bound to be challenging. I would emphasize instead one of the key elements of the councillor's motion, the ask for clear information about the development pipeline and what the city does have direct influence over, the regulatory landscape, including land use zoning. This is of particular importance given the persistent claims made that government regulations have prevented developers from supplying affordable housing units. Here, by way of conclusion, I would point to the City of Seattle as a model for what could, I would say should, be done. Seattle collects and makes widely available data on its zone development capacity, not just nominal capacity, that provides an invaluable tool to assess needs and current capability. Such measures are not static. They're regularly updated in light of changing circumstances. The assumptions, methodology, and determinations are readily accessible online, rendering them transparent and accountable to the public. They also provide an essential tool in determining what capacity increases are needed to accommodate future housing demand. With this approach and information, the city would have the means to flexibly adapt to changing levels of housing demand in a turbulent context. It would focus its energies on what it can control, the regulatory environment, and assess its capacity to accommodate development. It would have the needed information on hand as it engages in difficult discussions and negotiations with the public and the development industry about accommodations to support the provision of affordable housing for current and future residents. To me, this all seems eminently doable, reasonable, and necessary, and past due.